Welcome to Citizens Report. I am your host, Patti Ceppa, Vice President of the Radnor Citizens Police Organization. Today we are going to talk about being a victim of fraud and how to be safe and secure in an online world. Joining me today is Professor Rob DeVidio, Associate Professor of Criminology at Drexel University. Professor DeVidio does research and teaches in the area of high-tech crime. Thank you for being with us today. Now, we hear a lot about crime and fraud. What is the most recent items that you're dealing with in this area?
So before I get into that, let me say thanks for having me on. I think this is really an important message to get out there so people know how to safeguard themselves against falling victim to online-related frauds and keeping themselves safe online. I think, there are a number of different categories we can lump people into, right? So when we're talking about adults and even senior citizens, phishing really is the number one thing to look out for.
Okay.
And with the goal, think of the goal of the criminal here being to steal personal identifying information, that whether it's your social security number, credit card information, even something as simple as address and phone number. All this PII, we call it, is really important when it comes to those individuals looking to gain financially in your name, essentially stealing your identity.
Yes. Now, do they target via telephone or do they scan the internet? How does that work?
So phishing has evolved over the past, five years, and it's gotten a little more complex with a number of different ways in which the criminals go about in making that contact. The traditional phishing scheme, and it's not spelled F-I-S-H-I-N-G, it's P-H-I-S-H-I-N-G. So it's fish as in the band Fish, right? It's,
yes.
But it has nothing to do with them, right? So a traditional phishing scheme is such that you're going to get an email, and that email is going to purport to come from a popular brand that, let's say a popular bank, right? And it's going to say in the body of the email something like, we're updating our security preferences. We need you to click on this link and enter in your username and password so we can verify that you still have access to your account, or something along those lines. And you're going to click on that link. And it's going to take you to a very official looking website. In most instances, they're going to copy or really counterfeit that financial institution's website.
Wow.
Right? So you think as the user that you're going to, the official bank website, and you're going to be deceived into entering your information. Well, when you enter your information, nothing's going to happen. You're not going to get logged into an account. What's going to happen behind the scenes, though, is that information is going to get zipped off via, email to somebody likely overseas in some country that most people don't even know how to pronounce. And it's going to be sitting there, and they're going to be amassing this massive, trove of personal identifying information. In this case, what they're first trying to do is get access to your online account. Now, we also call phishing brand hijacking, because with that email that you're getting is purporting to come from a popular brand. So when these phishers, the criminals, get access to a database of email addresses, they're going to say, if we make this scheme or purporting to come from XYZ bank that is very popular across the United States, there's a good chance that a decent percentage of those individuals in this massive email list that we have are going to be customers of that particular bank. Because if they're not customers, you're not going to fall victim to the scheme. So fast forward a few years, we see a number of different ways in which people are getting contacted with the populars, as cell phones and text messaging and has become popular. We see phishing schemes, the criminals not sending these phishing emails out, but they're sending them out via text messaging. So you're going to get that on your cell phone. We call that smishing, S-M-S-I-S-H-I-N-G.
Wow.
We also see it via voice, via telephone. And you might get a robotic voice. When you answer your cell phone, it might sound like a very computer-generated robotic voice purporting to come from the IRS, saying you've fallen victim to or someone's using or working in your working under using your Social Security number to work as well, and the IRS is just calling to validate that they have your correct Social Security number. Could you enter that in via the cell phone? And that's just one of the many variants that are out there. But we call that vishing, voice phishing, right? So we see between emails, text messaging, and voice a number of different ways that they're reaching out, trying to contact potential victims. Not only are we seeing the brands being hijacked coming from financial institutions, we're seeing things like retail accounts like Amazon, other popular retailers that where the criminals know there's a mass of people shopping at them. We see video game accounts, for example, video game brands being hijacked by these schemes. Why? Because parents are connecting their credit card to their kids' video games account.
I do that. So yes,
it's it's not just the banking accounts that they're going after, and the personal identifying information associated with those accounts through these phishing schemes.
So, for instance, with a text message, I just received one recently. Can you do something to return to put block or stop? Can you text back something that will prohibit that from coming through again? Or
what you want to never do in these types of situations is engage the individual, right?
Okay.
And whether that's sending back a reply via text message, whether that's sending back a reply via email. Because when you do that, they know now they have a live person on the other end of that email or on the other end of that cell phone number. Because remember, they're buying these lists, so they don't know how active whether these accounts are. So you never want to engage them. If not, there are other reasons why you wouldn't want to do that, but that is something that we always tell people: just don't engage. Block the number, block the email. Most cell phones nowadays have the ability to block a number coming in. Depending on if you're using iOS or you're using Android, it depends on how you configure your menus to go and select to block that particular phone number, but that'll prevent them from contacting you again. But unfortunately, they're moving on to a different number and using a different number to contact people. They know that people are going to block you, and they have a system set up to deal with that. The same thing with via email. You can block, depending on your email provider, but most of them, if you're using Gmail, you're using Outlook Mail, you're using Yahoo Mail, they all have the ability to block. Most corporate organizations or enterprise environments have the ability to block an email address that you're getting spam from. But you definitely want to report it.
So, do you report it to the police, or what's?
No. You report it as spam, and then the entity running your mail server will know that not to let email come through from that particular email address again. So you don't want to report it to the police. Hasn't risen to that level of offense.
Okay, good. So, for instance, how do you protect yourself from this? Because let's say, for instance, they do get your identity or get money from you. Like, is there a way to prevent this instead? I've heard about these LifeLock companies that you could pay for to protect your identity. What are those all about?
So, this is something that you can protect yourself against, right? So when we talk about phishing, it's a form of what we call social engineering, right? The offenders are counting on you being duped, you being fooled, right? So they recognize that people aren't the most secure-minded, especially if you're the layperson, you're not in the security business, and if it's not something you do on a regular basis, you might see this email, looks like an official email, you'll click on it. So what can you do to prevent that, right? So the research tells us that people are not very good about picking out which emails are fake, right? So,
absolutely.
And when they go to that particular website, when they click on that link, they're also not good about picking out the discerning between the fake sites and the real sites, right? So you want to rely on the tools that your web browser and your email client or your email software that you're using have built into them first and foremost. So most web browsers will have phishing filters built into them.
Oh, okay.
Right, so you can rely on the browser to filter out or to prevent you from connecting to that particular website. So the browsers in the background have a list of known phishing websites that exist out there, these fictitious sites, based upon users reporting information about what they think are scams.
Is that constantly changing? Because I would assume
that's constantly being updated in the background without you having to go and proactively doing it, right?
Okay. Yep.
And the search engines, Google, Bing, the popular search engines are even doing that job when it comes to your returning search results. They're letting users know that this is a potential website that has malicious intent, whether it has malware built into the website or whether it's some sort of phishing or other fraudulent scheme, warning you not to click on the link to go to that site. So there are automated ways to deal with that. In the corporate world, you're seeing more and more. When I say corporate world, I'm talking about the for-profit as well as the non-for-profit sectors. Okay. You're seeing more and more security programs being rolled out to educate users, right? To educate, the salesperson or the researcher or the accountant. And they'll go and they'll purposely send out phishing emails that they create to see if people fall victim. And if you don't catch it as a fake email, they'll provide some training to the users, right? They'll say, these are the things you want to look out for. Look out for A, B, C, and D. Unfortunately, the person who doesn't work in a mid or large size company where they have the resources to do that type of training, or the person that's a stay-at-home parent or the retiree is not going to get access to that type of training. So we have to really rely on the automated tools that are out there. Let Microsoft, let Google, let Yahoo, let all these big tech companies and your banks and your brokering firms, let them do the job for you by providing some automated tools as well. And if I'm talking too much, you can stop me.
No,
but your financial institutions nowadays want you to be an informed consumer, want you to be a secure consumer. So they're going to provide information for people to, keep up on the latest security vulnerabilities and how to protect yourself. So if you're someone that doesn't get that type of training in the workplace, go to your banks, look on their websites, see what tools they have available to make sure that you can keep up with your, the latest in terms of how to protect yourself. The one thing I've learned in doing this for years is it doesn't stop. It's not a one and done type of deal.
I can imagine, yeah, because technology is changing every day. And
the criminals are smart. They change their methodologies on a regular basis because they know people quote unquote get hip to the what they're up to.
Okay, so the question you mentioned, malware, what is the difference? Can you talk about like ransomware compared to malware?
So malware is just a catch-all for software instructions that cause harm to your computing environment, whether it's a laptop, a smartphone, a tablet, or even a network. So when we talk about malware,
so like a
virus is one type of malware, a worm, a Trojan horse, and without getting too technical, they're all bad things, right? And when you have, Norton or Sophos or or McAfee antivirus, they're protecting against most forms of malware. So you as the end user don't have to worry about whether your antivirus program is protecting you against a worm. It's going to, right?
Okay.
So the ransomware is, we consider it a type of malware, and there are a few ways in which ransomware can impact your computer, but it's certainly on the rise. It's on the rise targeting corporations, government agencies, even police departments. It's on the rise attacking consumers, you and I, on our everyday, in our everyday in our everyday lives and having computers at home, whether it's computers to run our financial our finances at home, or whether it's just using them to store our personal family photos and vacation photos in our kids' machines, right? They're targeting those as well. So what ransomware is it's essentially they're holding your information for a fee, right? They're locking up your computer. They're encrypting your hard drive or a portion of your hard drive with very strong encryption, and they're saying, unless you pay us a certain amount of money, we're not giving you access to your files. Now, they're smart about it. They know that going after Patti Ceppa, and her home computing environment, Patty's not going to pay a lot of money, chances are, to get back her information. So they know how to put that price point at a few $100, $1,200 maybe, $2,400 at most. I've seen them up to $5,000 targeting consumers. But for the most part, we're talking a few $100s that you're going to have to pay in ransom to get back your access to your files and those family vacation photos. Again, your kids' term papers, your whatever you're storing on your computer. The corporate environment's a different story. The people are, they're charging hundreds of thousands of dollars when they, encrypt network drives, right? Because they're assuming that your backups aren't done on a regular basis, and you're going to need access to that information. And insurance companies are paying, but they're targeting consumers, the everyday user, with that. Wow. And again, people don't have a good backup plan in place most often, so they're not backing up those family photos. They're not backing up, their media libraries that they possibly could have spent a lot of money on songs that they purchased through one of the, online music stores, or they're not backing up, their, information about their, their computers where they hold all their tax information for the past few years, right? So it can be a pretty difficult thing to recover from if you don't have the proper backups. So you're paying, and how are these criminals asking for that receipt? Well, when they infect your computer with this ransomware, they're also providing a mechanism for you to pay them the ransom, in most instances via Bitcoin nowadays, or some other online, what we call cryptocurrency. And why are they doing that? Well, we saw that change, from ransomware in its infancy, requiring payments via, credit card and other means, whether it's some sort of, electronic transfer of funds, right, to these move towards cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, because it lowers the risk for the offender, right? Those are difficult to trace, if not in many instances impossible. So it lowers their risk. And when we still saw criminals launching these ransomware schemes, giving you, the user, an option to pay via credit card or other traditional means, or Bitcoin, for example, they would charge you less if you paid via Bitcoin because it was less of a risk to them, right? So they're smart in that sense. Unfortunately, people are falling victim to the tunes of, when we look at the aggregate numbers, millions of dollars a year in paying these people off. And the criminals know that if you continue to pay, that means that there are people that are willing to pay to get their money back, so they continue launching these scams against individuals.
Wow, that's amazing.
So what I suggest to people is certainly make sure you have a good backup plan in place, right? And they're cheap enough where if you want to use a backup service in the traditional sense that your computer is backed up on a regular basis, and only the files that you changed are backed up because the service that you're using knows which files you're changing. That's great, but you don't need to go to the added expense of having that type of service if you're on a fixed income, for example. You can use cloud storage drives, whether it's online storage offered by Microsoft, Google, or Dropbox, for example, to back up or to store important files. So if your home computing environment does get compromised, those files are still up there and readily accessible.
Okay, that's great recommendation. So what about as far as you mentioned children. What about like as far as the apps on the phones and all that? Do you see anything with that happening currently today?
So there we're talking about a different problem, right? We're talking about online safety, children being targeted in many instances for sexual purposes, right? And unfortunately, it's a huge problem out there, and it's been for some time. And law enforcement, it just can't keep up with it. And this is not to say that they're not capable to do it. It's just the volume of issues when it comes to online sexual offenses against targeting children it's just tremendous, and they're doing their best. There's a lot of talented people out there across the country and across the globe trying to solve this problem. The big thing that parents need to know, and if I've said this once, I've said it 100 times. It's not a one and done deal, right? You have to keep up on it. You don't have a talk with your kids once about online safety and think you're done, right? You need to constantly monitor and understand where the pitfalls are, right? As a criminologist, I say that parents need to play that role of capable guardian, and it's something that they always have to do until they, pat their kid on the head and say, all right, you're on your own now, right? Until they, after college and they leave out. That role never, doesn't stop when it comes to looking out for them. And what that means in cyberspace is understanding where victimization lies, right? So, you don't want to give your child access to Xbox Live, for example, or the PlayStation equivalent without you knowing what the pitfalls are, without you going in and understanding that there's a chat function in here, there's a messaging function in here, that people that you can, certain games have online play that other people can interact with your child with doing. So I always recommend to the parent, go in and play around in that operating environment so you can be comfortable enough to know where your kid is potentially going to be targeted. The same thing with the apps, right? Apps as simple as Words with Friends. And I'm not demonizing any type of app. I've played it, it's fun, and I'm sure many of the viewers have played it as well. But there's a chat function in it, and we've seen sexual assaults occurring as a result of people first being contacted via the chat function in what's seemingly an innocent game.
The same with bullying. They go through these apps.
Yeah, bullying is a totally different animal in and of itself, right? We're seeing text messaging. We're seeing social media, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, all the popular social media channels are forums for this type of behavior. The challenge nowadays, then, from when we were growing up, right? Bullying is not a new crime. No. The challenge nowadays is at least we had a sanctuary after school. We could go home. And, we'd be protected by the four walls in our house or protected by our parents and our siblings. Right. That's not the case nowadays. These kids are with these phones and their computer connections, they're always accessible. And that's what we're seeing, the bullying being, constant. It occurs in the school, and it occurs also after school hours because of that electronic connectivity, that ability to reach out and contact individuals. And, that's one of the things that we've seen. I've been doing work for years on cyber stalking and cyberbullying, going back to the, late 1990s. And one of the things we saw was back then was that, online harassment stayed online back then. Nowadays, it's crossing into the physical world. So, whereas in the past we saw people being harassed online, and it was mostly the harasser was not someone the victim knew in the physical world. That has changed now. And we're seeing that offender and victim relationship being something that has that existed prior to the harassment taking place in cyberspace, and it bumps up the element of concern from a victimization perspective, because you not only are you subjected to the psychological trauma that's associated with being harassed and bullied over a long period of time, but you're also run the risk of being physically assaulted, because we do know that there is that risk with that type of offending. Harassment sometimes results in physical assault.
Well, it's so hard nowadays because you look at the apps, and as parents, we don't know how to even look at some of these, how to dive into them, and you don't know if your child has a bad communication with somebody, because times it just goes away.
Yeah, I mean,
and it's very hard as a parent to really stay on top of it.
What I often recommend is using a centralized account for the App Store. So when your kids are downloading apps, you get notified because there's a receipt generated. Even if, for instance, in the iOS store, even if it's a free app, you still get notified that app's been downloaded by this account. So if my daughter goes and downloads an app, I get notified that she's downloaded this app. And to me, as a parent, what that tells me is now I need to go and investigate that particular app. Okay, if my child has the ability to download them without asking me first. You can set it up in such a way where they don't know your password, and you need a password to download any app, even if it's for free. And this way they have to come to you and ask for permission, and you can have that conversation
That's a great
about
idea.
it.
That's important. That's a great idea.
I think communication, at the end of the day, communication should be your first step with a child, especially if you're giving them their first cell phone. Have that conversation, talk about what's proper behavior, what's not proper behavior. And then if that person, you can always bump it up to the next step in terms of electronic monitoring, electronic surveillance, and keeping tabs on your child. That way, if you feel it's necessary. I'm one of those people that, when someone tells me, well, if my child screws up, then I'll bump it up to the next step and start monitoring them. Great. But I always tell them, well, if my child screws up, they're gonna get their cell phone taken away. It's not an issue of me then electronically monitoring them.
Oh my gosh, that's great information.
Yeah.
We could talk about this more and more. There's so many topics within your expertise that we could talk about. It's amazing, but we are out of time, unfortunately. But we want to thank you so much for coming, Professor DeVidio. It's really informative for us, so thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, and please join me again next time for another informative episode of the Citizens Report. If you would like to join the Citizens Police organization or simply gain information, please contact us. That'll be on your screen now. There you go, contact@radnorcitizenspolice.org. Thank you so much.